I was standing in my driveway watching my breath form clouds in the freezing Montana air when I saw her marching across the snowy expanse that separated our properties like some kind of Arctic conquistador. Patricia Henderson, president of our unwanted homeowner association, was wearing a puffy purple coat that made her look like an angry grape with legs, and she had that expression on her face that I'd come to recognize over the past 6 months since she'd moved into the neighborhood. It was the look that said someone, somewhere, was about to have their day ruined. My name is Garrison, and I'd owned my 10 acres of land outside Whitefish, Montana for 8 years before Patricia and her crew had decided to form an HOA that somehow, through legal technicalities I still didn't fully understand, had managed to rope in properties that had been grandfathered in decades before any subdivision existed. The whole thing was a bureaucratic nightmare involving old county records, rezoning from the 90s, and a loophole big enough to drive a truck through. My lawyer had told me fighting it would cost more than just dealing with their nonsense, so I'd reluctantly paid my dues and tried to fly under the radar. That strategy had worked fine until this morning, when I decided to take my new Arctic Cat snowmobile out for a spin across my own property. The machine was a beauty, a ZR 9000 Thundercat that I'd saved up for over 2 years to buy. In Montana, snowmobiles weren't just toys, they were practical transportation during the brutal winters when regular vehicles struggled with the deep snow. My property backed up to national forest land, which meant I had hundreds of miles of trails accessible right from my backyard. It was one of the main reasons I'd bought this place. Mr. Garrison, Patricia's voice cut through the cold air like a knife. She was close enough now that I could see the red flush in her cheeks, though whether that was from anger or the cold was anyone's guess. We need to talk about that monstrosity you have parked on your property. I glanced over at my snowmobile, which sat innocently in front of my garage, still warm from the hour I'd spent breaking it in on the trails. What about it? It's a violation of our community standards, she said, pulling out a tablet from inside her coat. She tapped at it with gloved fingers, struggling with the touchscreen for a moment before giving up and just holding it out toward me. Section 12. Subsection C clearly states that recreational vehicles must be stored in enclosed structures and out of sight from neighboring properties. I took a deep breath and reminded myself that losing my temper wouldn't help anything. Patricia, first of all, it's winter in Montana. This isn't a recreational vehicle, it's transportation. Second, my nearest neighbor is half a mile away. Third, and most importantly, I'm parked on my own property in front of my own garage, and I'll be putting it inside once the engine cools down. You don't want to park a hot engine in an enclosed space. Her lips pressed into a thin line. The rules don't specify distance to neighbors or make exceptions for cooling periods. If everyone just decided which rules they wanted to follow, we'd have chaos. We'd have freedom, I muttered under my breath, but apparently not quietly enough because her eyes narrowed. What was that? Nothing. Look, Patricia, I'm not trying to cause problems. I just want to use my property the way I've been using it for 8 years. I've been snowmobiling out here since before you even moved to Montana. This isn't new. Well, things are different now. We have standards to maintain. Property values to protect. She straightened her shoulders like she was preparing for battle. If you don't move that machine into your garage within the hour, I'll have no choice but to issue a fine. The engine needs at least another 30 minutes to cool properly, and even then I was planning to do some maintenance on it first. So no, I won't be moving it within the hour. I crossed my arms and met her glare with one of my own. And I'd like to see you try to make that fine stick in court. That was apparently the wrong thing to say because Patricia's face went from red to purple, matching her coat. "You know what? I'm calling the police. You're clearly operating an illegal vehicle on residential property, and you're being hostile and threatening toward a member of the HOA board." I actually laughed at that. Threatening. I'm standing on my own driveway having a conversation, and the police? Really? You're going to call the cops because I have a snowmobile on my own land in Montana? But she was already walking away, phone pressed to her ear. I watched her go, shaking my head in disbelief. This was a new level of absurdity, even for Patricia. In the 6 months since the HOA had formed, she'd complained about everything from the firewood I kept stacked beside my house to the fact that my truck was sometimes parked at an angle in my driveway. She tried to fine my neighbor, old Tom Crawford, for having a chicken coop even though he'd had those chickens for 15 years. She'd sent nasty letters to the Hendersons, no relation to her despite sharing a name, about their teenage son's basketball hoop being 2 inches over the height limit she'd decided on. But calling the cops, that was escalation to a whole new level. I went inside to make myself a cup of coffee while I waited to see if she'd actually go through with it. My cabin was exactly the kind of place I'd dreamed about when I was working construction in Seattle, saving every penny I could. It was built from local timber with massive windows that looked out over the mountains, a stone fireplace that could heat the whole place on the coldest nights, and enough land around it that I could pretend civilization didn't exist when I wanted to. I'd built half of it myself with help from friends, and every nail and board represented freedom from the cramped apartment and traffic-choked streets of my old life. The coffee was just finishing brewing when I heard the crunch of tires on snow outside. I looked out the window and sure enough, there was a sheriff's deputy pulling up my long driveway. Behind him, I could see Patricia's silver SUV following like a remora on a shark. I grabbed my coffee and headed back outside, pulling on a jacket as I went. The deputy was just getting out of his vehicle when I reached the driveway. He was a younger guy, maybe early 30s, with the kind of face that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. His name tag read Deputy Martinez. "Afternoon," I said, raising my coffee cup in greeting. "I'm guessing I know why you're here." Deputy Martinez glanced back at Patricia, who was emerging from her SUV with the determination of someone who knew they were absolutely in the right. "Got a call about an illegal vehicle and possible threats. You want to tell me your side?" "Happy to." "That's my snowmobile." I pointed at the Arctic Cat. "I took it out for a ride on my own property this morning, and I'm letting the engine cool before I put it in the garage. Mrs. Henderson here is upset because she thinks it violates some HOA rule she made up." "Made up?" Patricia's voice was shrill as she hurried over. "Officer, I have the documentation right here. This community has clear rules about vehicle storage, and Mr. Garrison is in blatant violation. Furthermore, when I attempted to address this violation in a civil manner, he became hostile and refused to comply." Deputy Martinez looked from Patricia to me and back again. "Madam, did he threaten you in any way? He told me he'd see me in court. That's clearly threatening legal action." The deputy's expression shifted slightly, and I could see him fighting back what might have been a smile. "Madam, mentioning court isn't a threat. It's exercising legal rights. Now about this vehicle." He walked over to the snowmobile, examining it briefly. "This is registered." "Yes, sir." "Registration is current, and I have insurance. Want me to grab the paperwork?" "That would be good, thanks." I headed into the house and retrieved my snowmobile documents from the filing cabinet where I kept all my important papers. When I came back out, Patricia was talking animatedly at Deputy Martinez, who had his hands in his pockets, and was nodding occasionally with the patient expression of someone who dealt with this type of thing before. "Here you go," I said, handing over the registration and insurance cards. Martinez examined them carefully, then handed them back. "Everything looks in order. Mr. Garrison, is this snowmobile parked on your property?" "Yes, sir. About 50 feet from my garage door." "And is that your garage?" "Yes, sir. Built it myself 5 years ago. Want to see the permits?" "That won't be necessary." He turned to Patricia. "Madam, I'm not seeing any legal violation here. This is Mr. Garrison's private property, and he's allowed to park his registered vehicle on it." Patricia's mouth opened and closed a few times like a fish. "But the HOA rules clearly state." "HOA rules aren't law, madam. They're civil agreements between property owners. If you have a dispute about HOA violations, you need to handle it through your HOA procedures or civil court. This isn't a police matter." But he's being uncooperative and hostile. Deputy Martinez looked at me with an expression that clearly said, "Help me out here." I just shrugged and sipped my coffee. "Mrs. Henderson," the deputy said, his voice taking on a slightly firmer tone. "From what I can see, Mr. Garrison is standing quietly on his own property drinking coffee. He hasn't broken any laws. He's got proper registration and insurance for his vehicle, and he's parking it on his own land. There's nothing illegal happening here. So you're just going to let him violate our community standards?" Patricia's voice was reaching new octaves. "I'm going to suggest that you take this up with your HOA board through proper channels. If Mr. Garrison refuses to comply with HOA rules, your recourse is through fines, liens, or civil court, not the police." Deputy Martinez was clearly done with this conversation. "Now, is there anything else I can help you with today?" Patricia looked like she wanted to argue more, but something in the deputy's expression must have told her she'd already lost this battle. "This isn't over," she said, pointing a finger at me. "The board will hear about this, and you will face consequences." "Looking forward to it," I said, which probably wasn't the smartest response, but the words were out before I could stop them. She huffed, turned on her heel, and marched back to her SUV. We watched as she got in, slammed the door hard enough that I worried for her door frame, and reversed down my driveway fast enough to kick up a spray of snow. Deputy Martinez let out a long breath once she was gone. Word of advice: that lady's called in about a dozen complaints in the last 3 months. The sheriff is getting tired of it. I bet. Thanks for being reasonable about this. Just doing my job. But seriously, watch yourself. People like that, they don't like being told no. She'll probably try to make your life difficult through the HOA. She's already been trying," I said. "This is just the latest escalation." Martinez nodded sympathetically. "Yeah, we're seeing more and more of these HOA disputes. People move out here for the freedom and space, then immediately try to create the same rule-heavy subdivisions they left behind." He walked back toward his vehicle, then paused. "Nice snowmobile, by the way. I've got a Polaris myself. Nothing like getting out on the trails." "It's heaven," I agreed. "You ever ride the backcountry up near Big Mountain?" "Not yet, but I've been meaning to. Heard the powder up there is incredible this year." We talked snowmobiling for a few more minutes before he finally left. I finished my coffee and went to check on the Arctic Cat's engine. It had cooled down enough to safely garage, so I rolled it inside and started the maintenance I'd planned. Changing the oil, checking the track tension, making sure everything was in good shape for the next ride. I was deep in the mechanical meditation of routine maintenance when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Tom Crawford, my neighbor from down the road. "Heard Patricia called the cops on you. She just left my place threatening to fine me for having my trash cans visible from the road. This woman is insane. I called him instead of texting back. Tom answered on the second ring. Lucas. Did she really call the sheriff? She did. Deputy came out, looked at my snowmobile, told her it wasn't a police matter, and basically told her to leave me alone. Tom's laugh was loud enough that I had to hold the phone away from my ear. I wish I could have seen her face. That woman thinks she's some kind of queen out here. You know, she tried to tell me I needed to repaint my barn. Said the weathered wood was bringing down property values. I told her my barn was built in 1952 and would be standing long after she was gone. What did she say to that? Turned red as a tomato and said she'd add it to my violation list. I've got about 15 fines I'm refusing to pay at this point. My lawyer says they can put a lien on my property, but they'd have to go through civil court first, and with the grandfather clause in my deed, it probably wouldn't hold up anyway. That was interesting. You have a grandfather clause? Sure do. My property has been in my family since 1948. When they did that rezoning thing in the 90s that Patricia's using to claim HOA authority, properties with continuous family ownership were supposed to be exempt. But nobody enforced it, and most people didn't know. I only found out when I hired a lawyer to look into this mess. Did your lawyer say anything about other properties? He said any property owned before the 1995 rezoning should technically be exempt, but you'd need to prove continuous ownership or have the original deed with the right language. My mind was racing. I'd bought my property in 2018, but the guy I'd bought it from, Bill Mason, had owned it since 1987, and Bill had bought it from his parents who'd owned it since the 1960s. Tom, can I get your lawyer's number? Absolutely. Hold on. There was a pause and some rustling. You got a pen? I grabbed a pencil from my workbench and wrote down the information on a scrap of cardboard. Thanks. This might be exactly what I need. Give them hell, Lucas. Someone needs to knock Patricia down a few pegs before she drives everyone in this area crazy. After I hung up with Tom, I spent some time thinking about my next move. Patricia had escalated this situation by calling the cops, which suggested she wasn't going to back down easily. If I could prove my property wasn't legally subject to her HOA authority, that would solve a lot of problems. But even if I couldn't, I wasn't about to let her dictate what I could and couldn't do on my own land. The next morning I called Tom's lawyer, a woman named Rebecca Wallace who had an office in Whitefish. Her secretary put me through after a brief hold. Mr. Garrison. Tom Crawford mentioned you might be calling. He tells me you're having trouble with the Pineview HOA. That's putting it mildly. The president called the police on me yesterday because I had my snowmobile parked in my own driveway. Rebecca made a sympathetic noise. Yes, Mrs. Henderson seems to be quite zealous in her enforcement. I've had 3 other clients contact me about issues with that particular HOA in the last month. What I can do is pull your property records and see if there's any basis for exemption from the HOA's authority. It will take some research. What are we talking about in terms of cost? For the initial research and consultation, probably around $800. If we need to take it to court, costs go up significantly, but we can cross that bridge if we come to it. I thought about it for a moment. $800 was a lot of money, but if it meant getting out from under Patricia's thumb permanently, it was worth it. Let's do it. Excellent. I'll need some information from you. We spent the next 20 minutes going over details about my property, when I'd bought it, who I'd bought it from, and any documentation I had. I promised to send her copies of my deed and closing documents. After hanging up, I felt like I'd at least taken some positive action instead of just reacting to Patricia's nonsense. I made breakfast, fed my dog Rex, a German Shepherd mix who'd been my constant companion for the past 4 years, and was just settling in to do some work. I ran a small custom furniture business from my workshop, building high-end pieces for clients across the region. It was fulfilling work that paid the bills and let me set my own schedule. I was in the middle of sanding a cherry wood table when Rex started barking. I looked out the workshop window and groaned. Patricia's SUV was coming up the driveway again, but this time she wasn't alone. There were two other vehicles following her. I wiped the sawdust off my hands and headed outside. Patricia emerged from her vehicle along with two other people I recognized from HOA meetings. One was Donald Fletcher, the vice president, a thin man in his 50s with wire-rimmed glasses and a permanent expression of disapproval. The other was Brenda Morris, the secretary, a heavy-set woman who always seemed uncomfortable with Patricia's more aggressive tactics. "Mr. Garrison," Patricia said formally as I approached, "we're here to conduct an inspection of your property for HOA violations." "An inspection? You can't just show up and demand to inspect my property." Donald stepped forward, holding up a clipboard. "According to the HOA bylaws, the board has the right to conduct inspections with 24 hours notice to ensure compliance with community standards." I didn't get any notice. Patricia pulled out her phone. "I sent you an email yesterday at 4:47 p.m. That's over 18 hours ago." I pulled out my own phone and checked. Sure enough, there was an email from Patricia with the subject line "Notice of Property Inspection." It had gone to my spam folder. "This is ridiculous. You send me a notice after calling the cops on me, and now you want to walk around my property looking for violations." "We're simply following procedure," Donald said in a nasal voice that made me want to throttle him. "The inspection won't take long if you cooperate." Brenda was looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Maybe we could reschedule, give Mr. Garrison proper notice." "We gave proper notice according to the bylaws," Patricia said sharply. "Now, Mr. Garrison, are you going to allow us to conduct this inspection, or do we need to note your refusal to comply?" I thought about telling them to get off my property, but something Tom's lawyer had said came back to me. If this was going to end up in court anyway, I didn't want to give them ammunition. "Fine. Inspect away. But I'm coming with you, and if you go near my workshop or inside my house, we're done." "We're only inspecting external violations," Donald said, making a note on his clipboard. What followed was one of the most absurd hours of my life. The three of them walked around my property with a literal checklist, writing down anything they could possibly construe as a violation. My firewood was stacked too high. My truck had a small dent in the bumper that apparently violated their standards for vehicle appearance. The satellite dish on my roof was the wrong color. My propane tank wasn't screened from view. My mailbox post had a slight lean to it. They took pictures of everything with their phones, Donald making notes while Patricia narrated like she was documenting a crime scene. Brenda mostly stayed quiet, though I caught her rolling her eyes a few times when Patricia got particularly ridiculous. "What about this?" Patricia pointed at my garden shed, a small structure I'd built 3 years ago to store tools and supplies. "What about it?" "It appears to be unpainted and constructed of untreated wood." Section 18, subsection F requires all outbuildings to be painted in earth tones or stained within 30 days of construction. That shed is 3 years old. Where were you 3 years ago? The rule still applies regardless of when the structure was built. You have 30 days from today to bring it into compliance. I bit back about a dozen responses that would have felt good to say but wouldn't help the situation. Instead, I just crossed my arms and watched them continue their inspection. When they finally reached my garage, Patricia peered inside at my snowmobile. "The vehicle is stored properly now, but we have documentation of it being in violation yesterday. That's a $200 fine. You're going to fine me for letting my snowmobile engine cool down before garaging it. Really? Rules are rules, Mr. Garrison. They spent another 20 minutes examining every square inch of my property they could access from outside. By the time they were done, Donald's clipboard was covered in notes, and I had a tension headache forming behind my eyes. You'll receive a formal notice of violations within 3 business days, Patricia said as they prepared to leave. Each violation carries a fine, and you'll have 30 days to bring your property into compliance or face additional penalties. I can't wait, I said flatly. After they left, I called Rebecca Wallace again and told her about the inspection. She sighed heavily. They're building a case against you. If they can stack up enough violations and fines, they can potentially place a lien on your property. It's aggressive, but it's happened before. What are my options? Wait for the formal violation notice, then we respond to each item and challenge their authority to enforce any of it. In the meantime, I'm expediting the research on your property's HOA status. I should have preliminary results by early next week. Thanks, Rebecca. I appreciate it. That weekend, I tried to put the HOA situation out of my mind and enjoy the things I'd moved to Montana for. I took Rex on a long snowshoe hike through the forest behind my property, the silence broken only by the crunch of snow and the occasional call of a raven. The mountains stretched out around us, white-capped and magnificent, and for a few hours I could pretend that Patricia Henderson and her clipboard didn't exist. Sunday afternoon, I met up with some friends at a local bar in Whitefish. Jake Morrison and his wife Emma were there, along with Carl Brennan and his girlfriend Sarah. We'd all been friends since I'd moved to the area, bonding over our shared love of the outdoors and escape from more urban environments. "Heard you had some excitement this week," Jake said as I sat down with a beer. He was a big guy who worked as a fishing guide in the summer and ski instructor in the winter, with the kind of perpetual tan that came from never working indoors. Let me guess. Small town gossip. Smaller town gossip, Emma corrected. She was petite and blonde, the opposite of Jake's massive frame, and worked as a veterinarian. One of my clients mentioned that Patricia Henderson called the sheriff on someone for having a snowmobile. Didn't take much to figure out it was probably you. I filled them in on the whole situation, from the initial confrontation to the inspection to the pending violation notices. By the time I was done, everyone at the table looked outraged on my behalf. "That's insane," Sarah said. She was a freelance writer who'd moved to Montana from New York a year ago. "How can an HOA even exist out here? I thought the whole point of Montana was freedom from that kind of thing." Apparently, there was some rezoning in the 90s that created a loophole, I explained. "I'm paying a lawyer to look into whether my property is actually subject to their authority." Carl, who worked as a carpenter and had helped me build parts of my cabin, shook his head. "I've heard stories about Patricia. She tried to get the county to shut down the Randolph's ranch last year because she said their cattle were creating a nuisance. Can you imagine? A cattle ranch in Montana being called a nuisance. What happened?" I asked. The county told her to pound sand. "The Randolphs have been there for 4 generations, but she made their lives hell for months, calling in complaints about everything from noise to smell to dust from their access road." "She sounds like a nightmare," Emma said. "The question is, why? Why move to rural Montana and immediately try to control everyone around you? Power trip," Jake suggested. "Some people just need to feel like they're in charge of something." We spent the rest of the evening talking about other things, but the conversation kept circling back to the HOA situation. Everyone had advice, from ignoring the violations to fighting back aggressively to moving to a different property entirely. I appreciated their support, even if none of the suggestions were particularly actionable. Monday morning, I got the violation notice. It came via certified mail, a thick envelope full of printed pages detailing every single thing Patricia and her crew had found during their inspection. The total fines came to $2,300. I called Rebecca immediately. "They're going for maximum pressure," she said after I read her the list. "Some of these are legitimate HOA concerns if the HOA has authority over your property. Others are ridiculous overreach." The good news is, I have preliminary results from my research, and Lucas, I think we've got something. My heart rate picked up. "What did you find?" "Your property was originally part of a larger parcel owned by the Mason family starting in 1962. In 1995, when the rezoning happened that created the legal framework the Pineview HOA is using, there was a county recorder error. Your property's legal description was never included in the new plat map that established the subdivision boundaries. Technically, according to the official records, your property doesn't exist within the Pineview subdivision at all." "Are you serious?" "Completely. It's a bureaucratic error that no one caught because the Mason family paid their property taxes and kept to themselves. When Bill Mason sold to you in 2018, the title company didn't catch it either because they were just checking for liens and ownership issues, not subdivision boundaries. The Pineview HOA has been claiming authority over your property based on proximity and assuming you're part of the subdivision, but legally, you're not." I felt like I could breathe for the first time in days. "What does this mean?" "It means we can challenge their authority completely. I'll need to file some paperwork with the county to correct the official records and make sure everything's properly documented. But once that's done, the HOA has no legal standing to enforce any rules against your property." "How long will that take?" "The filing itself is quick, but county bureaucracy being what it is, probably 2 to 3 weeks for everything to be officially processed. In the meantime, I can send a letter to the HOA informing them of the situation and demanding they cease all enforcement actions against you." "Do it." "Send the letter today if you can." "Already drafting it." "One more thing, Lucas. Once this becomes official, the HOA might try to fight it. They could claim adverse possession of authority or argue that you accepted their jurisdiction by paying dues. I only paid dues after my lawyer told me fighting would cost more than complying, and that was only 2 payments. That actually helps our case. You haven't been complying long enough to establish acceptance." "Okay, sit tight. I'll send you a copy of the letter before it goes out." 2 hours later, I received an email from Rebecca with the letter attached. It was beautiful in its formal, legal language. It explained the property boundary error, cited the relevant county records and regulations, and demanded that the Pineview HOA immediately cease and desist all enforcement actions against my property, including withdrawal of all fines and violations. It gave them 10 business days to respond. I read it 3 times, savoring every word. The next morning, I was working in my shop when I heard vehicles approaching. I looked out to see not just Patricia's SUV, but 4 other cars coming up my driveway. My stomach sank. This was going to be bad. I walked outside to find Patricia along with Donald, Brenda, and about 6 other people I recognized as HOA members and neighbors within the subdivision. Patricia was holding a printed copy of Rebecca's letter, and her face was a mask of rage. "What is this?" she demanded, waving the letter at me. "That's a letter from my attorney explaining that your HOA has no authority over my property." "That's absurd. Your property is clearly within our boundaries. According to the county records, it's not. There was an error in 1995 that was never corrected, My lawyer is correcting it now." Donald pushed his glasses up his nose. "This is obviously a delaying tactic. You can't just claim you're not part of the subdivision because of some supposed paperwork error." "It's not a supposed error. It's documented in the county records. My lawyer has all the information." "You're welcome to verify it yourself." One of the other people, a man I didn't know, stepped forward. "Look, we don't want trouble. We're just trying to maintain property values and community standards. Surely we can work something out." "I've been trying to work something out since this HOA formed," I said, keeping my voice level. "But Mrs. Henderson here has been looking for any excuse to fine me and make my life difficult. She called the cops on me for parking my snowmobile in my own driveway. She conducted an inspection and found thousands of dollars in bogus violations. I'm done trying to work with people who see me as a cash machine and a power trip." Patricia's voice was ice. "If you think you can just ignore our authority because of some technicality, you're wrong. We have lawyers too." "Then I guess they'll be in touch with my lawyer. Now I've got work to do. Please leave my property." "This isn't over," Patricia said, but she was already backing toward her vehicle. The group followed her, muttering among themselves. Brenda hung back for a moment. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "I think Patricia's been too aggressive about all this. I'll be voting to accept your exemption when it comes before the board." "Thanks, Brenda. I appreciate that." She nodded and hurried after the others. I watched them leave, feeling both triumphant and exhausted. This should have been the end of it. The legal facts were on my side, but I had a feeling Patricia Henderson wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. I was right. Over the next week, I received 3 more letters from the HOA, each more threatening than the last. They claimed that my lawyer's interpretation was incorrect, that I had established acceptance of their authority, that my refusal to comply would result in legal action. Rebecca responded to each one with calm, factual letters citing the relevant laws and records. Then things got weird. I woke up one morning to find that someone had spray-painted HOA violator on my mailbox. The paint was silver and still tacky, meaning it had been done sometime during the night. I took pictures and called the sheriff's office to file a report. A different deputy came out, an older guy named Foster who'd been with the department for 20 years. He examined the mailbox, took his own photos, and filled out a report. "You have any idea who might have done this?" he asked. "I'm in a dispute with the local HOA. They've been trying to enforce rules against my property, and my lawyer discovered that my land isn't actually within their legal jurisdiction. The HOA president hasn't taken it well." Deputy Foster raised his eyebrows. "Patricia Henderson, you know her." "Everyone at the department knows her. She's called in more complaints than just about anyone in the county. Most of them are garbage, but we have to respond anyway. You think she did this? I don't have proof, but the timing is suspicious. I'll include that in the report. Keep an eye out, and if you see anyone suspicious around your property, call it in immediately. If this escalates to more serious vandalism or you feel threatened, let us know." I spent the afternoon cleaning the spray paint off my mailbox. It took steel wool and paint thinner, and even then I had to repaint the whole thing. The entire time I was working, I kept looking over my shoulder, wondering if someone was watching. 2 days later, I came home from a supply run in Whitefish to find that my firewood stack had been knocked over. 3 cords of neatly stacked wood were scattered across my driveway. It took me 4 hours to restack it all, and I was furious by the time I finished. This time, when I called the sheriff, I specifically asked if Deputy Martinez was available. He arrived about an hour later. "This is getting out of hand," he said, surveying the scene. I'd taken pictures before restacking the wood, so at least there was documentation. "First the mailbox, now this. You have any security cameras? No, but I'm thinking about installing some. Might not be a bad idea. Look, off the record, I know Patricia Henderson has been causing problems for people, but unless we catch someone in the act or have concrete evidence, there's not much we can do. So she can just harass me and vandalize my property and there's no consequence. I didn't say that. File the report, document everything, and if we can establish a pattern of harassment, we can take action. But we need evidence. That evening, I ordered a security camera system online with overnight shipping. It was expensive, but my peace of mind was worth it. While I waited for it to arrive, I started parking my truck closer to the house and keeping Rex outside more during the day. He was a good watchdog and would bark at anyone who came near the property. The cameras arrived the next afternoon, and I spent several hours installing them. I put one covering the driveway, one pointed at the garage, one at the front door, and one covering the back of the property where the workshop was located. They were motion activated and connected to my phone, so I'd get alerts whenever anything moved in their field of view. That night, around 2 in the morning, my phone started buzzing. I grabbed it and saw a notification from the driveway camera. I pulled up the app and felt my blood run cold. There was a figure dressed in dark clothes approaching my mailbox with what looked like a baseball bat. I grabbed my phone and called 911 while I watched the live feed. The figure raised the bat and smashed it into my mailbox, denting it severely. Then they moved toward my truck. 911, what's your emergency? This is Lucas Garrison at 4750 Pine Ridge Road. Someone is on my property vandalizing my vehicle right now. I have them on security camera. Are you in danger, sir? I'm inside my house. They're outside. Stay inside and away from windows. I'm dispatching deputies to your location now. I kept watching the feed as the figure smashed my truck's side mirror and then moved toward the garage. They were trying the door, which thankfully was locked. Rex was barking furiously from inside the house, and I could see the figure look toward the sound. Then something amazing happened. I heard sirens in the distance, getting closer. The figure heard them too and froze. Then they ran, but instead of running down the driveway toward the road, they ran across the open snow toward the neighboring properties. I switched to my back camera and watched them run. The motion-activated recording was capturing everything. In the distance, I could see lights from the approaching patrol cars. By the time the deputies arrived, the figure was gone, but I had everything on video. Deputy Martinez was one of the responders, along with Deputy Foster and a third deputy I didn't know. "Show me the footage," Martinez said. We huddled around my phone as I played back the videos. The figure was clearly visible, though their face was covered by a ski mask. But there was something familiar about their build and movement. "That's a woman," Foster said, pointing at the screen. "Look at the way she moves, and she's not very tall." "Can you send us this footage?" Martinez asked, "already emailing it to you." They spent the next hour searching the area with flashlights, but whoever it was had gotten away. They did find footprints in the snow leading away from my property, and they followed them for about a quarter mile before they reached tire tracks on a side road. "She had a vehicle waiting," Foster said. "Probably parked it out of sight and walked in." Martinez corrected. "We don't know for sure it was a woman, but I had a pretty good idea who it was." The build matched Patricia Henderson, and the level of rage required to come to someone's property at 2 in the morning with a baseball bat seemed to fit with her escalating behavior. The next morning, Rebecca called me. "I heard about the vandalism last night. Are you okay?" "I'm fine." "Shaken up, but fine. I've got the whole thing on video. Send me a copy. This is harassment now, Lucas. Criminal harassment. We need to pursue this aggressively." I gave the video to the sheriff's department. Good. I'm also going to file for a restraining order against Patricia Henderson and any other HOA board members who have been involved in harassing you. This has gone way beyond a civil dispute. You think we can prove it was Patricia? The video might not show her face, but combined with the timeline of events, the pattern of harassment, and her documented hostility toward you, I think we can make a strong case. Let me work on it. 2 days later, I was served with papers. The HOA was suing me for unpaid fines, fees, and refusal to comply with community standards. They were asking for $7,000 plus legal fees and court costs. I called Rebecca immediately. She'd been expecting it. It's an intimidation tactic. They know their case is weak, but they're hoping you'll settle rather than fight. We're not settling. We're countersuing for harassment, vandalism, and the costs of your legal defense and property damage. I'm also filing that restraining order today. How long is this going to take? Could be months. But Lucas, we're going to win this. The facts are completely on our side. The vandalism actually helps our case because it shows the level of hostility you've been dealing with. The restraining order hearing was set for the following week. In the meantime, the security cameras caught 2 more incidents. The first was someone, again in dark clothes and a mask, trying to break into my workshop at 3 in the morning. They gave up when Rex started barking and the motion lights came on. The second was during the day, when a truck I didn't recognize drove slowly past my property 3 times in an hour, clearly surveying the place. I forwarded everything to both Rebecca and the sheriff's department. The net was tightening. The restraining order hearing was held in the Flathead County Courthouse in Kalispell. I sat with Rebecca at one table while Patricia sat at another with a lawyer I'd never seen before. She looked smaller somehow, less imposing than when she'd been standing in my driveway yelling about HOA violations. The judge was a woman in her 60s with gray hair and sharp eyes. She reviewed the evidence Rebecca had submitted, which included the security camera footage, the timeline of harassment, documented incidents, and the spray-painted mailbox photos. "Mrs. Henderson," the judge said, "do you have any response to these allegations?" Patricia's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, my client denies any involvement in vandalism or harassment. The plaintiff has provided no evidence that Mrs. Henderson was personally involved in any of these incidents. The figure in the security footage is unidentifiable. But the pattern of escalating hostility is clear," Rebecca countered. "My client has been targeted repeatedly following his legal challenge to the HOA's authority. Mrs. Henderson has made documented threats and has led a campaign of harassment through bogus violations and fines." The judge studied the footage again, particularly the video of the figure with the baseball bat. "The person in this video is approximately 5 feet 4 inches tall, based on comparison with the mailbox height. Mrs. Henderson, how tall are you?" 5'5", Patricia said quietly. "And do you own a vehicle matching the description Mr. Garrison's security footage captured near his property?" Patricia's lawyer whispered something to her. "I want to speak to my lawyer in private." The judge allowed a recess. When they came back 15 minutes later, Patricia looked like she'd been crying. Her lawyer stood. "Your Honor, my client wishes to make a statement." Patricia stood, her hands shaking. "I didn't mean for things to go this far. I was just trying to maintain community standards." When Mr. Garrison challenged the HOA's authority, I felt like everything I'd worked for was falling apart. I may have acted inappropriately, but I never meant to harm anyone. "You came to my property at 2 in the morning with a baseball bat," I said before Rebecca could stop me. "You smashed my mailbox and my truck. You've cost me thousands of dollars in repairs and legal fees." The judge held up a hand. "Mr. Garrison, you'll have a chance to speak. Mrs. Henderson, are you admitting to the vandalism incidents?" Patricia's lawyer tried to intervene, but Patricia was already nodding. "Yes, I did it. I was angry and I wasn't thinking clearly. I'm sorry." The courtroom was silent for a moment. Then the judge spoke. "Mrs. Henderson, vandalism is a criminal offense. Beyond this civil hearing, I'm obligated to refer this matter to the county attorney for potential criminal charges. As for the restraining order, I'm granting Mr. Garrison's request. You are to stay at least 500 feet away from his property, his person, and his vehicles at all times. You are not to contact him directly or indirectly. Any violation of this order will result in your immediate arrest. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor," Patricia whispered. "Furthermore, I'm ordering the Pineview HOA to immediately withdraw all fines, fees, and legal actions against Mr. Garrison's property, pending resolution of the jurisdictional dispute. If Mr. Garrison's attorney's research is correct and his property is not within HOA boundaries, the HOA will reimburse him for all dues paid under false pretenses." Patricia's lawyer started to object, but the judge cut him off. "I've reviewed the county records provided by Mr. Garrison's attorney. The boundary error is clear and documented. Unless you can provide compelling evidence to the contrary, I'm inclined to accept that Mr. Garrison's property is not subject to HOA authority." "Your Honor," the lawyer said, "we'd like time to conduct our own research. You have 2 weeks. If you can't provide contradictory evidence by then, my preliminary ruling stands. This hearing is adjourned." I walked out of the courthouse feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Rebecca was grinning. "That went better than I expected. Her confession was a gift. The county attorney will almost certainly file charges, and you'll have grounds for a substantial civil suit for damages." "I just want this to be over," I said. "I don't need to destroy her life. I just want to live on my property in peace." "That's very gracious of you, but she needs to face consequences for her actions. What she did was serious, Lucas. She committed multiple crimes because you stood up to her authority. People like that need to learn there are boundaries." 2 weeks later, the HOA's lawyer sent a letter confirming they had no contradictory evidence regarding my property's boundaries. The judge's ruling became final. My property was officially recognized as not being within the Pineview subdivision boundaries, and all HOA claims against me were withdrawn. The county attorney did file criminal charges against Patricia for vandalism and trespassing. She eventually pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 2 years probation, 200 hours of community service, and ordered to pay restitution for the damage to my property, which came to about $3,000. She also resigned as president of the Pineview HOA. Brenda Morris took over, and her first act was to send me a formal letter of apology on behalf of the organization. The civil lawsuit from the HOA was dropped, and they returned the 2 HOA dues payments I'd made, totaling $600. Rebecca suggested I could sue for additional damages, but I decided against it. I'd gotten what I wanted, which was my freedom and Patricia off my back. Life slowly returned to normal. I took my Arctic cat out on the trails regularly, often with Jake and some other friends who had their own machines. The Montana winter was glorious, all powder snow and clear skies, and I spent as much time as possible outside enjoying it. Tom Crawford invited me over for dinner one night a few weeks after everything was settled. His wife made an incredible pot roast, and we spent the evening talking about everything except HOAs. "You did good," Tom said as I was leaving. "Standing up to Patricia like that. She'd been terrorizing people around here for months, and nobody had the guts or resources to really fight back. Now, maybe the HOA will actually be about community instead of control. I heard they've been reforming their bylaws, I said, making them less restrictive, focusing on actual community concerns instead of petty stuff. Brenda's good people. She'll do right by everyone. Tom shook my hand. And if you ever need anything, you let me know. We watch out for each other out here. That was Montana in a nutshell. People might come out here looking for solitude, but when push came to shove, the community looked after its own. Patricia had forgotten that, had tried to impose suburban HOA culture on a place where people valued freedom and neighborly respect over rules and restrictions. About a month after the court case ended, I was out snowmobiling on the National Forest trails when I came across a woman having trouble with her machine. It had stalled out, and she couldn't get it restarted. I stopped to help, and after a few minutes of troubleshooting, we figured out it was just a fouled spark plug. I had a spare in my emergency kit and got her running again. "Thank you so much," she said, pulling off her helmet. She was in her 30s with red hair and a friendly smile. "I'm Olivia Sanders. I just moved to the area last month. Lucas Garrison. Welcome to Montana. Is everyone out here this helpful?" "Pretty much. We look out for each other. It's kind of necessary when you're miles from the nearest town in the middle of winter." We ended up riding together for a while, and I showed her some of the better trails in the area. She was from Oregon originally and had taken a job as a physical therapist in Whitefish. We exchanged phone numbers, and over the next few weeks we started riding together regularly. It was nice, having someone new to explore the trails with, someone who didn't know the whole HOA saga and just saw me as a fellow snowmobile enthusiast. We became friends first, then started having dinner together after our rides, and by spring we were dating. Life had a funny way of working out sometimes. What had started as one of the most stressful periods of my time in Montana had ended with me not only winning my freedom from an overbearing HOA, but also meeting someone special. I still saw Patricia occasionally, from a distance. She'd kept her property, but seemed to keep to herself now. I'd heard through the grapevine that she'd started therapy and was working through whatever issues had driven her to be so controlling. I hoped she found some peace. Holding on to anger and the need for control had nearly destroyed her life. Maybe this had been the wake-up call she needed. As for me, I was just grateful to be living the life I'd moved to Montana for. Working with my hands, building furniture that would last generations. Exploring the wilderness on my snowmobile in winter and my hiking boots in summer. Being part of a community that valued independence and mutual respect in equal measure. One evening in late spring, after the snow had melted and the mountains were starting to show green again, Olivia and I were sitting on my porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Rex was sprawled at our feet, content and drowsy. "You ever think about moving?" she asked. "After everything that happened with the HOA?" "Never," I said immediately. "This is home. I built this place with my own hands. I'm not letting anyone drive me away from it." "Good," she said, leaning her head on my shoulder, "because I really like it here." I put my arm around her and watched the sun disappear behind the mountains. The air was getting cool, and somewhere in the distance I could hear the call of a loon on one of the nearby lakes. This was why I'd come to Montana. This moment, this peace, this freedom. Patricia Henderson had tried to take that away from me with her rules and regulations and middle-of-the-night vandalism. But she'd failed because she'd fundamentally misunderstood what this place was about. Montana wasn't about manicured lawns and hidden trash cans and vehicles parked at precise angles. It was about space and independence, and the understanding that your rights ended where your neighbors began. The HOA still existed, but under Brenda's leadership, It had become what it probably should have been from the start. A loose organization focused on maintaining shared infrastructure and organizing community events. No more inspections, no more silly fines for having your firewood stacked wrong. Just neighbors helping neighbors and respecting each other's right to live as they chose on their own land. I thought about Deputy Martinez laughing when Patricia had called the cops on me for having my snowmobile in my driveway. That moment had been the beginning of the end for Patricia's reign of terror. He'd seen immediately how absurd the situation was, and his refusal to take her complaint seriously had emboldened me to fight back. Sometimes standing up to bullies was as simple as saying no and refusing to be intimidated. Patricia had counted on people being too tired or too worried about conflict to challenge her authority. But I'd learned a long time ago that the only way to deal with unreasonable people was to set firm boundaries and stick to them. The stars were coming out now, thousands of them visible in the clear Montana sky, far from any city lights. Olivia had fallen asleep against my shoulder, and I was content to sit there and enjoy the peace. My phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from Rebecca Wallace, following up on the final paperwork for the property boundary correction. Everything was officially recorded with the county now. My land was mine, free and clear of any HOA entanglements, exactly as it should have been all along. I smiled and put the phone away. Tomorrow I'd respond to the email, thank Rebecca for everything she'd done, and close that chapter of my life completely. Tonight, I was just going to sit here and enjoy being exactly where I wanted to be, living exactly the way I wanted to live. Rex lifted his head and looked out toward the dark forest, his ears perked. After a moment he relaxed, apparently deciding whatever he'd heard wasn't worth investigating. I scratched behind his ears, and he settled back down with a contented sigh. In the distance, I could hear the faint sound of a snowmobile even though it was late spring. Someone probably had a utility machine they used for property maintenance. That would be me in a few months when winter came back around, out on my Arctic cat exploring the trails and enjoying the freedom that I'd fought for and won. The memory of Patricia standing in my driveway that first day, pointing at my snowmobile and declaring it a violation, seemed almost funny now. She'd been so certain of her authority, so convinced that she had the right to tell me what I could and couldn't do on my own land. And she'd been spectacularly wrong. I'd learned a lot through this whole experience. About standing up for yourself, about the importance of documentation and evidence, about how sometimes the system actually works if you're willing to fight through the bureaucracy. But mostly I'd learned that the things worth having, peace and freedom and the right to live your life on your own terms, were worth fighting for. As spring turned into summer and summer into fall, life continued in its quiet rhythm. I built furniture in my workshop, sold pieces to clients across Montana and beyond, and spent my free time exploring the mountains with Olivia and Rex. The Pineview HOA continued under Brenda's reasonable leadership, and I even attended a couple of community barbecues they organized, no longer worried that someone would measure the angle of my parked truck or count my firewood stacks. Tom Crawford and I became closer friends, bonding over our shared experience of fighting Patricia's overreach. He eventually won his own court case regarding his grandfather clause and got all his fines dismissed as well. We joked about starting a support group for HOA survivors, but mostly we just enjoyed knowing we'd stood up for ourselves and won. When winter came around again, I took the Arctic cat out for its first ride of the season on a bright December morning. The snow was perfect, the machine ran like a dream, and I spent hours on the trails just enjoying the solitude and the incredible Montana landscape. When I got back home and parked in front of my garage to let the engine cool, I couldn't help but laugh thinking about how this simple act had sparked such an absurd conflict. But the conflict was over now. Patricia Henderson was rebuilding her life, hopefully learning that true community came from respect and cooperation, not control and dominance. The HOA had reformed into something reasonable. My property was legally confirmed as outside their jurisdiction, and I was free to live my life exactly as I'd always intended. Olivia came out with 2 mugs of hot chocolate as I was putting the snowmobile away. We stood in the garage, warming our hands on the mugs, and talked about our plans for the weekend. There was a Christmas party at Jake and Emma's place, some new trails we wanted to explore, and a furniture commission I needed to finish. It was ordinary life, peaceful and fulfilling, and I was grateful for every moment of it. The HOA saga had been stressful and expensive and frustrating, but it had also taught me that I could fight for what was mine and win. That was a valuable lesson, even if I hoped I'd never need to apply it again. As I locked up the garage for the night and headed inside with Olivia, Rex trotting along beside us, I took one last look at the mountains silhouetted against the darkening sky. This was home. This was freedom. And nobody, not Patricia Henderson or anyone else, was going to take it away from me ever again. The legal bills were paid, the vandalism damage was repaired, and the restraining order would stay in effect for 2 more years just to make sure Patricia stayed away. But more than any of that, I had the satisfaction of knowing I'd stood my ground. Sometimes that was all it took to stop a bully in their tracks, just standing firm and refusing to be pushed around. Inside, the fire was crackling in the fireplace, filling the cabin with warmth and the smell of burning pine. I settled onto the couch with Olivia on one side and Rex on the other, and thought about how lucky I was. Not just because I'd won my fight with the HOA, but because I'd built a life worth fighting for in the first place. Montana had given me everything I'd hoped for when I left Seattle all those years ago. Space to breathe, work that satisfied me, friends who had my back, and now someone special to share it all with. Patricia Henderson's attempted power trip had been nothing more than a bump in the road, a temporary obstacle that I'd overcome. And my Arctic cat sat safely in my garage, ready for the next adventure, parked exactly where I wanted it on my own property that was finally, officially, legally mine to do with as I pleased. That was the real victory, not defeating Patricia or the HOA, but securing the fundamental right to live my life on my own terms in the place I'd chosen to call home. As I drifted off to sleep that night, content and at peace, I knew that whatever challenges might come in the future, I had the strength and resources to face them. The HOA experience had proven that to me. Sometimes the hardest battles were worth fighting, and sometimes standing up for yourself was the only option. But tonight, there were no battles to fight, no angry HOA presidents marching up my driveway, no violation notices in the mail. Just the quiet peace of a Montana winter night, the warmth of home, and the certainty that I'd protected what mattered most. My land, my freedom, and my right to park my snowmobile wherever I wanted on my own property.